Live from Penrith in Western Sydney, this is Strong Australia with David Speers.
Good evening. We are live at Penrith Panthers tonight, but we're not talking about the footy that's actually underway right now just across the road from here. We're here as part of our Stronger Australia series in conjunction with the Business Council of Australia, getting out of the inner city bubble, Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, and getting to the parts of Australia where most live. We're here in Western Sydney, of course, and this is in many ways the engine room of the Australian economy right now. There are huge amounts of infrastructure spending going on here. There's also a huge demand for skilled work here in Western Sydney at the moment. Also a huge increase in population underway and forecast certainly over the next couple of decades. Now, yes, that means great opportunities. It also presents great challenges as well. And we've got a terrific lineup here tonight to talk about all of this. And it's not just about Western Sydney. Many of these issues are relevant to the outer urban areas in Melbourne, in Brisbane. And of course, that's where most of the marginal seats are in this country, the sort of territory that decides state and federal elections. So I'm sure the politicians will all be watching keenly this discussion tonight as well. We are joined by Jon Black. He's the Managing Director of TAFE New South Wales. David Pring is the KPMG Western Sydney Managing Partner. Graham Millett is the head of the Western Sydney Airport Corporation, and Grant King, the President of the Business Council of Australia. A very good evening to you all. Thank you for joining us. I do need to acknowledge we don't have any women on the panel tonight, but before you send an angry email about that, we did have some last-minute illness, misadventure changes. We've wound up with a terrific panel nonetheless, and thank you all very much for being part of it. Look, I just want to set the scene at the very outset about what it's like living here in Western Sydney, and this will echo for those, as I say, in outer metropolitan areas right around the country. But here in Western Sydney in particular, it's a terrific place. There are more and more job opportunities, but an incredible number of people still have to commute an incredible distance. An hour and a half, many of them who live here, to get to work, an hour and a half to get home. That is a lot of time not at work, a lot of time not with your family either. Now, look, perhaps, Graham, starting with you, you've spent a lot of time in Western Sydney growing up, working. Yes. How would you describe those sort of challenges?
Well, I think the challenges for families are huge. You talked about an hour and a half each way, each day. That's 15 hours a week that people are away from their loved ones. So the livability index has obviously declined as a result of that. And one of the things that I think Western Sydney is going to benefit from very significantly is the infrastructure development that's going on, both commercially, and that will in turn drive economic development at a much broader scale.
Trying to get jobs closer to home, basically.
So it's all about getting jobs into the region to begin with, but a different sort of job as well. So traditionally, if you look at Western Sydney, when I was growing up and even today, Western Sydney is the centre for manufacturing, it's the centre for industrial types of activities. The sorts of people who you're talking about that traipse into the city every day and back again are largely knowledge workers or service industry types of people.
So what sort of jobs are they? Sort of universities?
They're university jobs, they're college jobs, they're TAFE type jobs. They're jobs that are typically considered to be more white collar than blue collar. And the people have to leave the Western Sydney area in order to take advantage of that work. So it's not only about increasing the number of jobs in Western Sydney, but it's also about changing the nature, the structure of those jobs. So you'll be seeing more jobs in healthcare, for example, more jobs in aerospace, more jobs in education, more jobs that require a different sort of education for people to come through the pipeline with. And that's why we're working with universities, with TAFEs, with high schools, in fact right down to preschool level, to try and ensure that in future the people who are coming through the education system are more aligned to the skill set that's going to be needed in the future. If you think about our airport, for example.
And I want to come back to that. I want to come back to the airport and come back particularly to your comment there about getting involved at the preschool level as well, to build up the skills that are needed here. But when we look at this as a great future laid out there, but it also is meant to, the predictions are, include a lot more people here as well. I think the estimate is a city the size of Adelaide in the next 20 years will be added to Western Sydney. Grant King, what do you think? Can it cope? Do we have the infrastructure here in Western Sydney to cope with that many people?
So it does need to catch up, and I think as you've conveyed and Graham's conveyed, this idea that you've got a city big not just by Australian standards but by global standards. 1 in 10 Australians live in the western suburbs of Sydney. But it's a city on the edge of a city. Massive numbers of people moving from one city to another, as you've described, for work. Now, the infrastructure is critical in two regards. One, to make living within this region much better. Travel, facilities, hospitals, health, education, all the things that the community wants. But also, in so doing, what good infrastructure does is boost productivity. And productivity creates new jobs and further investment. And I think the long-term picture for the western suburbs of Sydney is a growing city with better infrastructure, increasing productivity, and what you then get is this huge payoff because all this starts to connect together and you get these supply chains emerging, these new ecosystems, business to business. And as is already the case, western suburbs becomes one of the biggest job-creating communities or
regions. Do you think a lot of people
here
see it that way, or do you think many would say, well, hang on, we're full. We really can't handle millions more being added to this part of Sydney?
Yeah. Look, I don't know whether they're saying we're full. There's a lot of money being spent on infrastructure now to improve the services, rail and road in particular. The airport is going to make a massive difference to the area, absolutely massive difference. And I think the important thing is that working together changes the type and nature of work in the area as well. And my sense is that if people see that and believe that there will be different and better job opportunities as the years go by, they will be very for the change that's happening in the area. So infrastructure is critical.
Well, David, what do you think just on that question? I mean, yes, there will be better paying jobs, more challenging jobs over time here for those at the moment who do commute so far into the city. But is the infrastructure planning right at the moment for it?
Well, the infrastructure is certainly catching up. And if we're going to move to a city where we live, work and play within 30 minutes of each other...
Which is the ideal, right? Which shouldn't have to go more than 30 minutes.
Which is the ideal. But we're in a city now that is growing very, very quickly. And from a business point of view, I think there's great opportunity for getting competitive advantage in terms of bringing jobs and business to Western Sydney. That's why we've opened our offices in both Penrith and Parramatta. So that's our three offices matching the Greater Sydney Commission's three-city model. And that gives us a great competitive advantage in being able to attract talented, highly educated people who can accelerate their careers and live close to home. And I think that's already is a competitive advantage for business.
Yeah, I mean, Jon, what do you think just on this question about, too many people in Western Sydney? Is there a point at which it is full, or do you think there is room to keep growing here, to keep expanding and keep developing into those new jobs?
Well, I think any city around the world has obviously got growth pressures, and it's planning. And you mentioned the Sydney City Commission. That's essential, obviously, designing the city of the future, and what a great opportunity. And I guess we're playing a bit of catch-up in terms of that quality of life that they're not having now. So to me, that seems critical, the planning provisions. And through those sort of means, you can plan a very livable city, one that people want to live in and enjoy and raise families in and have great jobs that are close to work. And the centre of one of the greatest places to live on the world. So, I wouldn't like to comment if it's too full or not. I think it's just how well we plan it and deliver it. I'm more concerned about the skills issue we're facing. I mean, we're struggling now to address the skills shortage, and with this enormous opportunity, fantastic opportunity we've got just around the corner, whether it's building airports, the aerotropolis that follow. Where are we going to get the skilled workforce from?
Well, this is where you come in. This is where TAFE really comes in. I mean, just lay out for us what the skills shortage is at the moment. And, Graham, I'm sure you've got some views on this at the moment too, trying to get this new airport built. You're going to need a lot of skilled workers. We will. We'll need construction workers to begin with, and there are shortages in the construction industry because of the infrastructure boom that's going on in both New South Wales and also in Victoria. But if we think further ahead to the operation of the airport from 2026, late 2026 onwards, it's a very different sort of airport that we're building, and it's a very different sort of future. How's it different? Populations. Well, for example, the airport that we're building will be the first digital airport in Australia. First fully digital airport in Australia. What does that mean? It means that we're going to be able to take advantage of technologies which are just at the cusp of being invented. So we're talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking about automation, we're talking about advanced robotics, which requires a different skill set to the sorts of skill sets that are required today. And that's why, as I was saying earlier, we need to get into the education system to ensure that we have a pipeline of people coming through capable of being able to operate in that sort of environment. I'm always fascinated at what that means, sort of more automation at airports. I mean, I certainly know when I go and check in, you can do it yourself now, but are you talking about behind the scenes with, what, baggage handling or...?
I'm talking about from the time you enter the airport until the time you get onto the aircraft, it's going to be very different. For example, the passenger experience will be radically different. At the moment, if you need to travel internationally, pretty much to any airport in Australia, it's a very good idea to get there about 3 hours in advance, because you go through a processing system where you get patted down, you stand in a machine and it whizzes around you, you get your bags opened and checked. The sort of airport we're talking about is one where you simply walk through and that's all you do. In fact, you're not checked in until you get to the gate. And the time taken to do that is not 3 hours. The time taken to do that is about 45, 50 minutes. This is the sort of technology.
Well, this will be music to the ears of a lot of, airline travellers in Australia, that you could turn up a whole lot closer to the departure time.
I'll not only turn up closer to the departure time, but have a much more enjoyable experience while you're there. All the surveys will tell you that the most trying part of a journey for anybody is no longer the aircraft, it's now the airports that are
getting through the airport.
It's all about getting through easily.
We've got a little sidetrack there, but you're going to need the right skills.
Indeed.
To do all of that.
Indeed.
What are the skills shortage numbers right now in, I guess, Western Sydney? Is there any sort of figure in terms of the shortfall?
Yeah, well, look, there's a number of studies. I've referred today to a Deloitte study that identified 70 to 80,000 shortfall now across
70
the range.
to 80,000?
That's across there in terms of vacancies and jobs and the demand. And that's across the broad spectrum of employment areas. But if I take construction and I take a statewide view, 50,000.
There's 50,000 shortfall in construction jobs in New South Wales.
In the broad range of construction jobs. Now, if you go down to another important thing that no one's mentioned to the point is the important service industry and support hospitality.
Yeah.
As I sit here tonight, we need 19,000 chefs. So these are big numbers for our nation in particular, and we've got an important role to play in that, because this is generating the economics and the ability for our communities to develop and go forward.
Just before we get to what needs to happen to address that, if this continues, right, if we stay on this shortfall that we're on when it comes to skilled workers, what happens with a big project like Western Sydney Airport? It's meant to open 2026, that's right?
Correct.
Can that be met if this shortfall isn't fixed?
If the shortfall isn't fixed, what it generally means is that there will be a bidding up of prices for labour. That's typically what will happen. And the winner will be that particular project which offers the highest wages. That's not good economics.
So the airport's going to cost a lot more than estimated?
No, the airport won't cost a lot more, because we've got strategies in place that address this particular issue.
But can it still be delivered on time?
Undoubtedly. I'm extremely confident that it can be delivered on time.
Even if there's a skill shortage that's there right now, if that continues, it'll still be okay?
No, I think we're going to be okay. We've looked at our demand for labour against the supply of labour, and we're confident that it'll all...
Graham would say that, but generally speaking, I'm not doubting that, but generally speaking, if this skills shortage applies across a lot of these big infrastructure projects, there's roads, there's rail projects, there's the airport, what does it mean? It means it's going to cost more, or it's going to take longer to build?
I think what it means is we've got to do something about it. And the very fact we're having the conversation, the fact that Jon can quote you all the figures, says we're aware that this is a challenge, not we, the broader community, the education part of the community, for example. I think what it means is we need to have a serious look at the resourcing of our vocational education and training system. I think there's many of us, the BCA included, that would say that's an area that we've probably let run down a bit. It's been a bit of a neglected area, and we need to make sure that we've got effective resources and effective training programs in place to bring people up to speed. I mean, unemployment at just over 5% and underemployment at nearly 13% says there are lots of people, there are lots of jobs. It's a skills match issue. And at the end of the day, with forethought, we can get people into the training system, retraining in the training system more quickly to match those needs. And I think, as Graham illustrated, the person today that might be working a very sophisticated piece of plant and equipment in earthworks preparing for the airport might in 5 or 10 years been operating a highly automated, roboticised type piece of equipment.
They're going to need those
They'll need to
skills.
go back, and they should go back through the vocational training system and be retrained. So I think if we're smart about it, we know there's an issue, we know there's a challenge. People like Jon
and just before we get to what
it.
needs to change to make this happen, to match those skills, take construction, for example. Why, if there is this sort of shortfall, aren't we seeing more wages growth, Grant? I mean, yesterday's wage figures, they show in the private sector barely keeping up with inflation.
Well, that's why I think Graham's going to hit his schedule, because we know underemployment's sort of around that 10, 12, 13%. unemployment's 5, but underemployment's still quite
People
high.
not getting enough
And
work.
so if you sort of look at that point of people who are not working getting jobs, people who are not working the hours they want to work working more hours, and people who are working getting pay increases, those three things come together to drive wage growth.
So you are
and
confident
incomes growth.
wage growth is about to happen?
Yeah, so I think that what's happening when you get economic growth and you get investment, and that's what we saw in this year and leading into the budget and the forecasts in the budget, there's every reason to believe that we can bring down underemployment, and as that underemployment comes down, it should flow through into wages growth. But we've got to match the skills requirement with the job.
Does everyone agree with that? Because some have questioned whether the link is still there between unemployment coming down and then wages starting to lift.
Well, in the construction broadly across Australia, of course, we saw the biggest ever investment in building things to support the mining industry. Right, massive wages.
They sure did go up.
Right, so there is a soft landing, I suspect, to that, of taking some pressure out of the wage growth. But as we've seen in recent times, in Western Australia, Queensland, mining back up. So where's this going to pressure into the wages? It's not my area of expertise, but I'm looking at it from the point of view is the future labour force, and I agree with Grant there. And also it's pockets in Western Sydney where we've got the highest unemployment rate in New South Wales and in Australia. But that is generally youth unemployment, and that is the untapped latent labour force that we need to get into. And I was really excited when Graham said he's looking at preschool, because that is the pipeline coming through. And I'm sort of mounting an argument, well, wait a minute, why does everyone have to go to university?
And you've been making this point today, and it's a fascinating one, this debate about whether too many kids are being channelled into university versus TAFE. Now, everyone's got the choice, but your point is that it's not a level playing field when it comes to government assistance.
That's correct. Look, I sit in this awkward position, I suppose, that a state government entity, state governments have got the responsibility for vocational education and training, supported by the Commonwealth, and universities are a Commonwealth beast. I see ourselves as a public entity, as we are. Universities are a public entity, in the most case in Australia. So I'm just arguing for particularly the higher level qualifications that are sometimes lost. And let me give you a couple of figures that is really concerning me now. In, for instance, building and construction, these are the diploma level courses. This is the supervisors, this is the superintendents that we need to supervise and deliver the projects. Down, since 2 years' time, I'm down 80% in enrolments.
Down 80% over the last 2 years.
In New South Wales, the state government is funding the entry-level trades, which are exciting to say are up 20%, or almost 20% this year compared with last.
Which is great. But you're going to need building supervisors.
But we're going to need building supervisors, and the state government's putting in, well, it's over $1.3 billion into supporting that. But I've got this problem with the higher level qualifications.
Why aren't people enrolling in that?
Why aren't they?
Why is that coming?
Well, I have a suspicion that I've got to look at that in a lot of more detail. But if it's complicated to get education support through a loan, which is what I was arguing today, that's one factor. It's a significant factor of what I'm hearing if you just go into any of our call centres.
Well, let's just unpack that, because a lot of people won't understand what's the difference for a young person who's looking at, do I go to university and study a business or a law degree, or do I go to TAFE and look at this course you're talking about to become a building supervisor? What's the different loan arrangement?
Well, I'd need to probably go back a bit of time, because Australia, unfortunately, we had a lemon system, and I think people know that, the vet fee help system, which was rorted, bodgy providers, and then, of course, students that didn't get the education they deserved or paid for. That's gone, and I congratulate the government, federal government, for killing that off. But the pendulum swung so far now, it is so hard to get what's called a vet student loan.
The upfront loan.
Upfront loan to support a diploma is so hard, a 10-step process, and people's eyes roll back and go, I've got to do what? And in some cases, of course, you've got to do a language and literacy test to go to TAFE. Well, what I'm arguing is that let's get the pendulum to swing more in a position where a public provider like TAFE can access the same loans as a student enrolling.
So are you saying you do actually have to go through a lot more hoops to get that for a TAFE course than a university degree?
That is correct.
Things like the language test.
And I think most universities have their own tests. We have a mandated one, but and I would say that was just one of those processes that just put people off.
Yeah.
I just want to make it easy. I want to be on a fair playing field with the universities. And the thing that probably concerns me most, though, in terms of the university argument, is the transition to work. The transition to work, when we're getting the data there that's showing university completion, but take law, for example, only 1 in 20 students studying law will enter that profession.
So just cutting to the chase on this issue, if the federal government doesn't change the rules around accessing the fee help for TAFE students, we're going to see this skills problem continue.
Yeah, and I'm arguing that because I'm trying to look in the future. It's the pipeline issues I'm dealing with today. But if you look at the demand and the changing nature of work as described with technology, we need to invest in preparing for that. And I like to say, well, certainly TAFE New South Wales, we're doing that. But at the same time, to address the here and now skills shortage issues, let's have a good look at it.
What Grant, would you back in that argument there? There needs to be an easier path to help people study.
I agree with 2 key points John's made. I think the government had the wisdom to see that it wasn't working 5 years ago, so I absolutely agree with that comment. But we still feel that the capacity to deliver through the vocational training system or the TAFE system is way short of where it should be. And at the end of the day, if you broadly thought about those skills as being the skills that people have to operate things where there's practical as well as academic knowledge, we need to boost the output. We need to make sure that system is efficient. People can get into the system, get through the system, get out of the system and get the jobs.
Is TAFE producing the sort of skills that the business needs?
Well, I think the very figures that John quoted says there's a mismatch. If we look at where demand for work is, and I won't repeat the figures, but there's a big mismatch here if you took a 5 or 10 year view, then you might say the answer to that is no. But again, we know that. We're having the conversation. Let's change that.
And where does the fault for that lie? Where's the problem there? Is it the sort of stuff you're teaching, or is it the changing nature of the jobs?
Look, I have to say I have a bit of a personal view here, but I think it's partly cultural and partly historical that we put more value on tertiary education and university education, and in the process, I think, perhaps not knowingly or even deliberately, but nonetheless devalued.
Unconscious bias.
Yeah, lowered the value of vocational training, and I think that's a mistake. I think we've let ourselves down by doing that. I think we have to help our young people understand that a vocational career is just as good as a university or tertiary career.
And we need to work closer with the universities. I think, Grant, you're right in the terms of universities providing theoretical knowledge. We're providing the practical knowledge. Let's make sure those that are learning the theory also are complemented with those practical skills to enable them to effectively work.
But I think it starts earlier than that. I think it starts back in high school. I think it starts back in primary school, and perhaps even earlier than that. But certainly primary school and high school. The cultural issues you're talking about, I think, are important. We've long cherished the professional career, the doctor, the lawyer, etc., and that was fine in days when that was appropriate.
And is that parents a lot of the time saying, I want little Johnny to be a lawyer or a...
Exactly. And the fact of the matter is that the world has changed significantly since then, and it's going to change again even more quickly and more markedly than it has in the past. And so it's partly these cultural issues that we have to adjust to, get people to adjust to as well, which is one of the reasons that we're going into high schools and primary schools and to ensure that
Just tell me quickly what you're doing there, because we were talking about this before the show. Western Sydney Airport is getting involved in schools,
so we're getting involved in the educational sector. We want to get into preschools. We want to...
what do you do in a preschool?
So in preschools there are programs that are available for 3.5, 4-year-olds getting into the 5-year-olds as they go into kindergarten, into primary schools. There are programs that help them develop their STEM type of skill sets, so science, technology, engineering and mathematics, and those programs continue into primary school, then they continue through into high school and right through into either the TAFEs or into universities. So it's well known that Australia lags behind in STEM, and one of the things we're trying to do is to help with this mismatch that we have currently between supply and demand in labour. That's one of the remits that
I guess we're addressing. 4-year-olds are the ones who are going to be running that airport of the future
but that's exactly
you were talking about earlier.
But that's exactly right. You've got to take a strategic view. You must take a strategic view. To just address the problem as it is today or over the next 5 years is insufficient. You've got to be looking at 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, in fact.
Well, I'm not sure many businesses doing that.
Not many do. But
it's a huge project
to happen. It's
and
beginning to happen.
We need to take a quick break, but I want to come back. This project, the Western Sydney Airport, really is transformational, not just for Western Sydney, but for New South Wales, really, and potentially the Australian economy.
And for Australia.
Exactly. And I want to explore that because it really is interesting. Stay with us. Welcome back. We were talking just before the break about the huge skills shortage, certainly here in Western Sydney, but certainly in many parts of Australia as well. Yes, a lot of investment going on, some big projects. We're going to talk about the Western Sydney Airport in a minute. But getting the right skills to deliver all of this is a real challenge. We need to get more people into these TAFE courses. I just need to ask you, Jon Black, as the head of TAFE in New South Wales, what do you think about Bill Shorten's promise just last week, 100,000 TAFE places where he says he'll waive the upfront fees?
Well, I'm not going to get involved with some government policy decisions, but what I will say at the moment, we don't have upfront fees for most of the pre-vocational courses. That's a New South Wales government policy to attract students. I would prefer to see a little bit more debate and policy discussion around the transition from school to either university or vet. I agree totally with what Grant said in terms of the perception that TAFE's some sort of second choice option. What we've got to get better at internally for TAFE, of course, is telling the students they're more likely to get a job. They're going to get paid more than the equivalent university graduate.
Yeah, but well, Graham, you can weigh in on a policy debate here. We often hear both sides of politics talk about university funding, but is it good to hear some talk about a big commitment to TAFE funding here as well?
Yeah, look, my understanding, and I have to say our overall belief in the BCA, is that a lot of public money is committed to education, and our view is that probably in aggregate we should take the view that that's roughly the right amount, so we can spend it better.
Right.
And I think that should always be the starting point. Can we spend it better? So Jon's made a very compelling case, and I think in the discussion we're having earlier, making the point that getting people into the courses, there's funding for courses if they can get access to it. If we can make accessing the existing funding easier, which suggests there's enough funding, people will get into courses. If they can get their loans easier, they'll get into courses and they'll go to TAFE. So I think it's about spending the money we're spending on education better and more effectively, and overcoming, perhaps, as we've talked a bit about, some of the cultural biases that might exist around whether a TAFE education is a good way to journey your career.
Graham, let's talk about this big project you're overseeing. So what is it, $5.3 billion committed by the federal government to the Western Sydney Airport. Where is it at the moment? Construction hasn't yet begun, but it will pretty soon?
Construction we expect to start in September of this year.
All right, so just 4 or 5 months down the track.
It's not far away. In fact, there's already some work being done on site by Transgrid. Transgrid's burying an aerial 330 kV cable, putting that underground. At the moment, if we were to leave it where it was, it bisects the main runway. Aircraft and high voltage cables don't tend to fix terribly well.
Could be a problem, yeah.
So Transgrid are doing a great job in getting on with that. But earthworks start on site. The early earthworks start on site in September of this year, and the main works for package 1, which is really the levelling of the entire site, and it's a 1,780 hectare site, twice the size of Sydney Airport. That will commence, we schedule for September of next year, 2019, so that the airport can then open at the end of 2026.
So there's a lot of jobs in construction, obviously.
About 11,000.
11,000, and then when it's built, the estimation is...
The estimation is that in the next 5 years there'll be about 28,000 jobs. In my estimation, within 15 years of opening, so about 2040, there will be somewhere around about 50,000 jobs. That's my estimate, but I think that's conservative, and I think when you combine private sector jobs with public sector jobs, we're looking at significantly more than that.
Which is, transformative for Western Sydney, no doubt about that. But the other key to Western Sydney Airport is this debate over whether it should be a 24/7 operation. No curfew. Sydney Airport, of course, does have an overnight curfew. The plan, as far as I'm aware at the moment, is no curfew with your airport, and that's cemented. That's not going to change.
As far as I'm concerned, it's cemented.
Right. Why is that so important?
Well, it's important for a number of reasons. Firstly, you have to understand that the curfew at Sydney Airport is largely to protect residents. Residents live very, very close to the airport. We're not making those same mistakes, and we're working very closely with the state government to ensure that residential development does not encroach on the airport.
So how far away from the airport is the nearest home?
So on the approach paths, it's 10 kilometres. which is quite a distance. At Sydney Airport, I think the nearest residence is something like 600 metres.
Yeah.
So there's a very significant difference there. And a lot of work is being done with Air Services Australia to make sure that the air corridors are structured in such a way that any noise impact is minimised, coupled with the fact that the airport won't be open for another 9 years or so, and over that period of time aircraft engine technology will advance to the point where they're likely to be about 7% quieter than the best aircraft today. So
how much?
About 7% quieter. Each new generation...
That's not a huge amount, I've got to say, is it?
It's very significant. Each new generation of aircraft engine is about 7%
Still,
quieter.
if it's flying over at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, might wake a few people up.
No, the impact, in fact, will be minimal. We're structuring the air corridors in such a way that the aircraft are directed away from residential areas.
Okay.
So it will be nothing like Sydney Airport, nothing like it at all.
Yeah, well, David, what do you think? I mean, I guess there have long been mixed views on the Western Sydney Airport in this part of Sydney, but since the commitment made, you know, the project's going ahead, money's committed, and, you know, the earthwork's going to begin pretty soon. Do you sense that there's been a change of attitude?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a very, very big piece of ownership of the airport from Western Sydney. From a business point of view, businesses are thinking about how the airport will change, transform their operations. The connection to the world, being much quicker in getting to the major markets of Asia. And a lot of businesses are looking around, how do we think about clustering around the airport? But I think overall there's been a big acceptance of the airport once the announcement actually happened.
Yeah, because, Grant, there'd be a lot of businesses who are limited around, well, probably New South Wales at the moment, because there is no way to get your product to an Asian market overnight, given the curfew at Sydney Airport. If you wanted to get your food, whatever your produce is, this could be an opportunity to access those markets any time of day.
I think in several respects. Let's talk of a fresh food hub, for example, here in the western suburbs of Sydney, and Graham could talk about that much better than I could, but that's just one example. But I think the other example, if you look at what the future holds, and people use this term fulfilment, logistics, these buzzwords, but more and more people are shopping online, more and more goods are shipped, you know, not in containers in 6 weeks, but in planes overnight.
Yep.
So I think if you look at the way people are going to live their lives in the future, the airport and what the airport can do fits the future. It fits the way goods are going to be moved, people are going to shop. Sounds strange to say they're going to shop through airplanes, but I mean, they're going to order things and they're going to be delivered in 24 or 48 hours in very different ways than they have traditionally been.
And Graham, are the airlines progressing their plans with you? I mean, are they keen not just for freight but for passenger flights as well to have that overnight capability to
So
come
we have
in and out?
ongoing discussions with all of the major airlines, with Qantas and Virgin here in Australia. We've had quite extensive discussions also with a number of Asian carriers. At a conference we attended in Brisbane recently, it was surprising how informed the Asian carriers were about Western Sydney Airport. They understood when it was opening, they understood that it had a single runway, they particularly understood that it was curfew-free, which was fundamental to them. Because
so they will be keen to fly in and out of Western Sydney
Absolutely they would be. And it was the fact that it was curfew-free that was so attractive to them, because it gives them such great asset utilisation of their aircraft.
But for Qantas and Virgin, of course, they make a lot of their money flying between the main population centres of Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne. They can't do that beyond the curfew at the moment. So do you think there'll be a lot of Sydney, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne flights coming out of your airport?
Well, I think there will be, because if you look at Sydney Airport at the moment, it is what they call slot constrained in the peak periods, and the majority of people like to travel in the peak periods. Once Sydney Airport is completely full in the peaks, which won't be very long now, 1 or 2 or 3 years, then where are the airlines going to go? Where are the passengers going to go? They don't want to travel off-peak, they want to travel in the peaks, and we'll be able to offer that to them.
Well, what do you think? Will passengers be keen to take up? Because I assume you get a lot cheaper flight if you're willing to fly at 1 a.m.
Well, it's a market segmentation issue. When you look at your business travellers, they're very much peak travellers. When you look at the low-cost carrier, the tourists, they're quite happy to travel outside the peaks.
Yeah.
And so if you segment
will there
the
be a market for that?
There is absolutely a market for that. Absolutely a market for that. All of our studies demonstrate that there is.
And that then can be transformative in terms of the tourism business as well, Grant, can't it?
Well, I think, to take the point that was just made, if you arrive at Sydney Airport at the end of the curfew at 10:30 and drive 2 hours to get home, it's 12:30. Yeah. Why not arrive here at 12? I mean, so I think that there's surely going to be huge demand given the population growth. 3 million people by 2030 or something in this area, an entire city. I don't think there's any doubt the airport's just going to be extraordinarily successful and important to the region.
And the other big part with that growth, but also the current population, is the high number of people who were born overseas, and the visitor economy is going to be enormous.
Well, it's a very good point, because here in Western Sydney, 35% of residents are born overseas, and many more than that would have a parent who is born overseas, so they do have a stronger connection.
Great connection
with the world.
Yeah, and that's both travelling out, but also family travelling in to visit. So that whole visitor economy is going to be worth quite a lot to the economy of Western Sydney.
Look, this obviously sounds like a very sensible investment of public money in a big infrastructure project. They're not all like that, though, Grant King, are they, when it comes to government investing in infrastructure? Perhaps I should throw on the table the Inland Rail project. Would you call that one a productive spend of taxpayers' money?
Well, look, we like the work that Infrastructure Australia is doing. We think the government has rightly, and I think both sides of politics have rightly committed to the idea that a sort of independent, well-resourced organisation is better placed to advise us on the infrastructure we need. Now, the fact of the matter is the Inland Rail, as I understand, is lower down that list of priorities.
Higher on the political priorities, perhaps you may not want to comment.
Yeah, but the infrastructure projects announced in the budget were very consistent with the priorities.
Okay, there's like $24.5 billion announced last week.
I think that's very closely matched to the priorities that Infrastructure Australia indicated. So that's the first point. The right infrastructure is a productivity boosting, service boosting, investment, great for jobs, great for income. But at the end of the day, the other and second important point is not all infrastructure has to be built by government. I think in the case of the airport, it's a very long time. I mean, 2026, when you consider the work to be done, is quite timely, but for many people, a fair way away. So when some characteristics like very long investment horizons suit the public investment in infrastructure, but at the end of the day, a lot of infrastructure can be funded by the private sector. And one of the keys, Australia is good at doing that. And we can do more infrastructure if we make it attractive for private sector investment.
Well, attractive usually means a toll applies if it's a road, and that's largely what we're talking about here. But, is there an argument that people here in Penrith, for example, carry an unfair burden of tolls? If they want to go to the city, it's going to cost them, $20, $30 to get there and back.
Yeah. So I think that's reflected in two parts. The important point is all infrastructure is paid for. It is paid for. It has to be paid for. But sometimes you don't see it because it's paid for out of taxation revenue, and so there's not that immediate causality. So make no mistake, all infrastructure is paid for by the community. I think the second important point, and it almost goes back to where we started the conversation, bring the jobs out here so you don't have to travel and pay the tolls. And I think that's the key thing. And I think the airport is going to be so significant in changing the type of work available in the western suburbs of Sydney. And if instead of 40% of people travelling out of the region and paying those tolls, 20% are, or some lesser number are, that's a huge economic gain for people. So I think that notion of working half an hour from where you live is a good thing to aim for.
Absolutely right, absolutely right.
And it's driven by infrastructure investment.
We've got to take another quick break. I want to come back after that to this question of not just the high-skilled jobs and the skill shortages we talked about there, but what about those entry-level positions, those who've been long-term unemployed, those who might be refugees, those who might come from an area of disadvantage. What is being done to skill them up and make the best productive use of that labour that is there? Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. We've been talking a bit about the huge infrastructure investments that are underway in certainly Western Sydney, probably more than anywhere in the country right now. I think everyone would agree. But there is a labour shortage. How to fill those positions, ensure these wonderful projects are all delivered for the good of the people here and the good of the economy. Yes, there's a need for the higher skilled workers as well, but also utilising those who are unemployed, those who've been long-term unemployed as well, and getting them trained for some of these jobs, getting them skilled up to do some of these entry-level positions as well. We're going to play you a little clip here. It's from a program being run by Lend-Lease, in fact, on the Northern Road Hub, one of the infrastructure projects underway, but they do it in conjunction with you guys at TAFE, where it's on-the-job training, essentially. It gives you a bit of an idea of what that means. Have a look.
The Lend-Lease has established the Northern Road Employment and Training Hub in association with Roads and Maritime Services and New South Wales Government, with the view of creating opportunities for Western Sydney communities with the upcoming significant amount of infrastructure work both on the Northern Road and the Western Sydney Airport. In total, it's a $1.6 billion upgrade. This is $200 million worth of that upgrade. A lot of the apprentices that we have coming on board come to the industry with no skills whatsoever. So we bring them through an initial pre-training course where they learn things such as how to be safe on a construction site, critically important. They also learn certain skills such as carpentry, how to operate machinery, how to manage day-to-day labouring work. This programme is very significant in its contribution to Western Sydney. It's based here in the heart of Western Sydney in Penrith. It's tapping into the local communities, and being here and being established here means that people don't have too far to travel.
I'm 19 years old, I'm a labourer here, and at the moment we're doing TAFE. On our day-to-day apprenticeship, we are just working hands-on power tools and around machinery. So, yeah, it's safely how to do it. For a local girl like me, it's really good. Come to work easily.
One of our main programs is the Women in Construction. Once they come on board, they're given on-site training opportunities and on-site development opportunities, and then they run into a traineeship and an apprenticeship.
Just wondering about TAFE, what days are on and off?
So my role here is to support the 10 apprentices that Lend-Lease have taken on. Apprentices in the past have not always stuck to their training that they've done, and I think that that's where this is a great value add, that the support that these apprentices are being given, whether it be a lifestyle question or support, or then they might just need clarity around their pay slips and what is a pay slip and the different things, or even how to approach or speak with someone who might be senior. It's anything and everything that we're able to offer, whether it be vocational or whether it be some lifestyle stuff.
Down here on the right, you've got your rev control.
I'm a civil construction apprentice. I came to Australia around 11 years ago as an accountant, skilled migrant. Since I'm working here, I'm studying on the job site, and I go back to TAFE classroom. We combine all the theory and the activity together on site, make me build up all the knowledge.
Actually getting the that it's out here and getting them on the ground, working with seasoned construction workers is really the most important part of the whole program. Bring people on, train them up and upskill them, and then look towards the 4,000 or so opportunities that will be established over the next 5 to 10 years in this area.
This is an amazing project, and it's only the beginning of these apprentices' future.
Get an apprenticeship, you'll learn new things every day.
So, Jon, just tell us a bit about how, we saw there some examples of women in particular in this project learning on the job, and obviously that makes a huge difference rather than sitting in the classroom. You're going to soak up a lot more of the hands-on experience. How widely available is that sort of situation?
Well, you said something there that was very important. You said classroom. Well, I don't see that as a construction site.
That's the classroom.
That is a classroom.
Exactly right.
And we've got to start to change people's views of that. That's us training the workforce for the future, because yes, they might be entry-level jobs, they're learning those initial skills, but they're also going to be moving through to be the leaders, the superintendents. So, look, TAFE New South Wales have proudly been associated with Lend-Lease in this case with what we call the skills exchange model, and that's been announced to support the new airport. And as you said,
how does that work? When the government, like the state government, for example, funds a project like that, commissions or chooses Lend-Lease to deliver it, do they work into it some requirement to do this sort of thing?
There's some contracting issues, and the federal government, as the proponent, will initiate that how they see fit in a commercial arrangement. TAFE needs to step up and respond commercially to support those businesses in delivering on-site training, because when we take the history of Barangaroo, which was a Lend-Lease project with the skills exchange, when we're talking over 10,000 people benefiting, the thing that excited me there when looking at the data was that the retention rate was so much higher than other courses where they're having to go to a campus or travel somewhere for training, if they're doing it on site. And guess what? They're putting into practice what they're learning. They're working in a safe environment, and we can co-benefit. So,
and are you guys going to be doing that sort of thing?
We're delighted to be part of the skills exchange, and we're in fact talking with TAFE only next week about setting up a pop-up type of college on the site, and that will be for heavy equipment operators where we see that there's a shortage. So following in the steps of Lend-Lease, we'll be doing exactly that.
Yeah, and look, I'm sure, Grant, that's the model that anyone in a construction project in particular should be looking at. But are there other applications? If we look at some of these other areas we've talked about, higher skilled STEM, where that sort of workplace classroom can become the norm?
Well, look, I think a very practical example, and we hear a lot about automation of vehicles, and so we know, for example, a lot of our mines in Australia, we're now going to driverless trucks.
Yep.
Now, people who trained as diesel mechanics, and that's what they were doing 5 years ago, are now installing roboticised automated equipment on these trucks. Completely different set of skills, but that's happened. That they've learnt in the workplace. The courses have happened in the workplace. It's been supported by this sort of practical training, and these people are doing highly sophisticated jobs, creating these automated vehicles in mines, for example. So that's another example where that notion of learning as you're working, evolving your skills from traditional skills we thought of, as I say, diesel mechanics, to robot mechanics. I'm not sure that that's a term you'd use, John, but robot mechanics. These things are happening all the time, and you've talked about a highly automated digital airport. Now, the people that are going to do that may well be, electricians or other tradespeople today, and helping them evolve those skills, letting them come back and relearn quickly is what the future's all about.
Yeah, well, it certainly seems to make sense. Just to pull it all together in the minute or so that we've got left before we wrap it up, I mean, yes, there's a lot of money being put in now. We've talked a little bit about whether that's enough and in the right areas and in the right ways to deal with the population growth that's going to continue here and, if anything, escalate. How to get the right skills to match the right demand for those jobs and for those projects. Is everyone confident that we're on the right track, that Western Sydney is getting what it needs to tackle some of those problems around long commute times, bringing jobs back here, better jobs, higher skill, higher paying jobs as well? Just some final comments on whether everyone is confident about the future here or would like to see some sort of change. David?
I'll jump in there. In terms of the businesses that are in Western Sydney, there is a long journey to go in terms of transforming some of those businesses and looking at how they're going to continue to grow. And some of that's with advanced manufacturing or advanced robotics. Some of the things that are at the airport are also going to be in other areas of the economy. So I think that transformation piece that businesses undertaking is important, and that will bring with it an upskilling of the workforce into all of those areas.
All right.
I was just going to say, I think the Western Suburbs is a showcase for Australia, and you almost began on that point. Growing population, big investment in infrastructure, productivity growth, better jobs, job diversity, education. That's the magic formula. I hope people who live in Western Sydney are confident about their future, and I hope the rest of Australia can look at what's happening in Western Sydney and be confident that there's a future for all of us as well.
Well, we hope so as well. We are out of time. Thank you all very much for a fascinating discussion tonight. Thank you for joining us at home. Don't go away after the break. It's Paul Murray Live.